because of somebody who reached out today, but I was a bit busy. And then when they asked this of me, I realized I don't quite have a resource that can help you with this. And I just wanted to talk about questions you should ask someone if you're doing your first wedding cake order. So I'm going to assume you're talking to the bride or the couple or whoever's helping the couple plan themselves. And I want to talk about what are the first 20 questions to ask them for you to get information so that once you get that information, you can go on to the next step, right? Now, first, I do want to mention to people this is going to be a very, just an overview, right? An overview of the questions to ask. I always tell people if you want in depth help, we have online classes, we have physical classes, and I have a specific physical class that's a 5-day class if you're in Nairobi that does wedding cake costing, pricing, how to give contracts, how to give quotations, and then the 5-day class actually teaches you decoration on how to stack and decorate a wedding cake. We also have an online class that's 4 months as well. If you're anywhere in the world, you can take the class. And again, it talks about contracts, quotations, everything, how to cost and price, because those are very big topics. So today, the only topics I'm covering are the first 20 questions to ask someone who is talking to you about taking a wedding cake order. So you haven't taken this order, you are just getting started on this. And again, this was inspired today by somebody who reached out to me. I was a little bit busy earlier, but they reached out and asked me what do I ask them. And we have this YouTube video that I did some time back that talked about wedding cakes, but it didn't talk about the questions. So I wanted to do one that talks about the questions. So I'm going to start now. Do comment below, hit them love bubbles if you're watching this live. I'll appreciate it. So the first question that you want to ask the couple is, when is the wedding date and what's the time? Like, what's the program for that day, right? So what you want to do is ask the person, when do you want to do this wedding cake? Why? Because you want to see if you can take the order. Sometimes if this wedding cake is like in 2 days, you might not be able to take the wedding cake order, correct? So you want to know the date of that specific wedding and the timing, right? When are they starting? When do they need the cake presented? That's what you want to do, right? So that's the first question: wedding date and time. Second is the details on the venue, right? Where is this going to be held? So for example, I'm a baker based in Nairobi, Kenya. So if I'm asking somebody, where is it, if they're in a different county, if they're in a different country, right? Depending on the type of baker you are, you can do it out of county or an external thing, but you need to know so you can be able to give that quotation really nicely. And you can also start discussing the details of the actual wedding cake, because hey, you never know if they want a whipped cream and you live in Nairobi and they want it in the coast, and that'd be difficult in terms of logistics, right? So the second question is you want to ask what the venue is. Third question is guest count. How many people are coming to the wedding? The reason this is important, it's like the same reason why people will ask for cake servings. You need to know how many people are supposed to eat this cake so that you can advise you, the bride or the couple, whoever's doing the wedding cake order, appropriately what type of quantity of cake do they need. So the third question you want to ask the couple for your first wedding cake order is guest count. How many people are going to be attending the wedding? The fourth question you want to ask is, and by the way, I want to mention this is not in any order, and I'll tell you that I have a template that you can WhatsApp DM me if you want later. Fourth, theme and style of the wedding. This again, especially if this is your first wedding cake order, maybe you do not have all the skills. Maybe you know how to work with whipped cream, you know how to work with buttercream, but maybe you don't know how to work with fondant, or you're not so comfortable working with ganache. So the importance of number four question is, what theme and style of the wedding are you doing, right? Because this could have a lot of stuff involved. Maybe they already have a wedding cake they want, they have a specific design they want, or maybe they're like specific theme that you want, and use, right? So you need to kind of get an idea of the theme and style of wedding. And African wedding, especially if you're in Kenya, you know that they have specific colors. They'll tell you, we have a wine red and we have yellow or something like, or purple and yellow. So once they start giving you these color palettes and all that stuff, you'll have an idea of what it is. And by the way, a note I want to say here, if they start telling you they want specific colors, please get a swatch or like a specific color that they want. If they can give you a piece of the material, please get it, because I've seen people have issues with the final wedding cake color because it didn't turn out exactly what the bride wanted, and that's never a good thing, guys. So you want your bride happy, and so make sure you get the specific thing that you're supposed to get. The fifth question you want to ask this person, now getting into the cake itself, is what cake design do they prefer? Again, most of these people either have an image or they have something they're thinking about. Here's my thing: if they don't have anything they're thinking about, and you're just thinking of getting into that wedding cake space, and you're a smart baker who had already done a few samples themselves, and you've done some tiered cakes or some other stuff, you can show them your portfolio. And if you don't have one, please start building one. However, most of these people are going to tell you, oh, I want a tiered cake, right? The ones with like 3 tier, 4 tier. Or I want separate tiers, or they'll show you multiple images that they've come up with, right? So the fifth question you want to ask is what cake design preference do you want, right? Now, the other thing you want to ask, the sixth one you want to ask, is cake flavors and fillings, right? So basically, what cake flavor are you thinking? Most people, again, may not have specifics on what they want to do, but generally you can ask them, are you thinking of any wedding cake flavors? Some people be like, oh, I want the traditional rich fruit cake or not, or something like that. Hi, Macule, I see you on TikTok. And is it okay to make a wedding cake before 2 days? Yes, as long as you have calculated the shelf time, it's refrigerated or frozen. Okay, as long as it's not gonna spoil, it's very okay. I've done one when I baked like on a Tuesday and the cake was for Saturday, and I just put it in the freezer and then I defrosted it like Thursday or Friday. So yes, it's okay to make a wedding cake before 2 days. So going to the seventh question you want to ask them, and especially in this day and age, this is a question that is getting very, very important. Dietary restrictions or allergies, just in case, right? Like just in case, is there somebody in the crowd, or are you thinking of maybe you want or a specific eggless, or do you have wheat problems? I actually remember a former student of mine who was also a former instructor of ours, who told me that she did a wedding cake, but then they wanted one specific tier, or one specific like cake by itself, a separate tier, to be eggless because of a specific person who was in an important guest of theirs who had an egg problem, right? So it's important to ask if there's going to be any type of dietary restriction, any allergies, or you can also mention to people that for them to tell their crowd or for them to tell their guests that these are going to be gluten kind of products and possibly something with soya or nuts, so that if anybody has an allergy, they should say, or at least not eat the cake, right? So that's the seventh question to ask: any allergies? Eighth question to ask: budget for the cake. Now, this might seem a bit weird, but it's important to ask these people what their budget is, because they might be giving you a dream of, like, we want a 10 tier wedding cake with red and gold and all these lovely things. Unfortunately, their budget is like 10,000 shillings, right? Their budget is like $50. So you want to make sure that you're managing expectations between the budget and the design and the theme. So one of the things you do want to be honest with the couple or whoever is ordering this wedding cake, especially if it's your first wedding cake, you don't want to get into trouble when it comes to budget. So just have an idea of what budget they're thinking about, which helps you either manage expectations or helps you advise them, listen, you might have to increase that budget if you are feeding 1,000 people, right? Something like that. So eighth question to ask is, what budget do you have for your wedding cake? Ninth question to ask is delivery and setup details, right? Now, most of the time, I will strongly suggest to you to be the person who's delivering and setting up the cake. You can add that cost in your quotation. However, there are some people who are trying to save costs so much that I remember my second wedding cake that I did years ago. They insisted on collecting that wedding cake, and there were separate tiers and there were buttercream, and I understood because they had a very low budget. It was a very simple wedding. Even the design was very simple. And so when they explained to me their scenario, and at that time I was getting started and I was just trying to build my portfolio, I agreed, but I also had stipulations that I told them, like, listen guys, even if you're picking up, once it gets out of here, I am not responsible. I also talked to the person who was supposed to be handling the cake and told them how to hold the cake box, how to set up, how to cut, and all that stuff. So you will have some people who don't want you to deliver and set up, but if possible, please be the one who's delivering that cake. Please be the one who is setting up that cake. So that's the ninth question to ask if this is your first wedding cake order. what are your terms? What are you thinking about delivery and setup? It can help you plan out your logistics, especially if it's somewhere that's very far, a different county, a different country. You can plan yourself very well, or destination wedding, whichever. 10th question you want to ask the couple if you're doing your first wedding cake order is cake cutting and serving plans. Again, this is kind of tied in into the delivery. If you're doing the delivery, you want to make sure you're doing the cake cutting and you're serving. However, here's my thing. Let me give you an example of the last wedding cake that I did that tended to have issues. We were the ones who were cutting the wedding cake, and at that time, my sister was actually my assistant. I always have somebody to assist me, which means that we will cut the cake, but we will not distribute it to the guests because it's a lot of work to cut and distribute, right? I believe this wedding had about 500 to 600 guests. I actually think there were more than that, but just a point to note. So the important thing to note is that you need to know who's cutting the cake and will they have people to serve. So the wedding I was at, the ushers were the ones who were supposed to serve that wedding cake. But at first, they tended to have some logistic issues. So what I did is I called one of them and I told them, listen, you guys are supposed to serve. I explained to them what to do. Then we cut the cake and they started distributing. So have that discussion with your bride because your bride on that day will not be there to help you. So if you have these discussions before, they'll be able to give you a way forward. So please discuss cake cutting and serving plans with this couple. Immaculate, I see another question. As new bakers, is it good to say no? Or is there another way? I can't do that for that money. Immaculate, it's a perfect question. I think that it's very okay to say no, especially if one, you think it's too cheap, or two, you cannot do it if you do not have the skill to do it, right? So you can find very nice ways of saying no. You can be like, no, I'm so sorry, I will not be available. Or, no, I'm so sorry, that is below the budget that I can afford. This is the amount of money that I can afford. And if they're the type of person who is receptive, you can explain to them, listen, this is a long process. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of hours. I cannot do a cake for that amount of money. You can suggest a different design that's cheaper and simpler and tell them for a simpler or cheaper thing, I can do this. But I cannot do this for this cost because it's going to be at a loss and I won't be making money. The reason I invite you to have those conversations is because you are offering a service for profit. So you don't expect me to be doing things for free, right? And so if you need to say no, Immaculate, just say no. It is okay to say no to people if you know that you cannot do it at that price. So I hope that answers your question. So my 11th question that I'm going to tell you guys that you should ask your bride if this is your first wedding cake order is what is your preferred cake size and number of tiers, right? So you've been talking maybe in this discussion for like 30 minutes and you're getting to the point where you're discussing, hey, the size. And so you can again sort of ask them, listen, what are you thinking? 10 kg, 20 kg? And then at that point you can even start giving pointers like, listen, if you have 500 guests, we need to do a minimum of at least this number of cakes. You'll get, especially for African weddings, we'll have these pre-packs, we call them pre-cuts in Kenya, and it could be like, you can tell people, listen, we can do a main cake that's like about 20 kgs, and then we can do 10 or 20 or 300 or 600 pre-cuts. You can start kind of getting a feel for what your client wants, but also suggesting stuff that's going to help your bride or the couple on choosing the right size for their big day. You're welcome, Immaculate. The 12th question you want to ask your couple for your first wedding cake is, do they have anything that they want extra? Do they have any requests on add-on elements? An example of this could be, we want wine glasses, we want those wine glasses engraved Mr. and Mrs. Or we want, instead of non-alcoholic champagne, we want actual champagne or actual wine. Those kind of things, right? Some people will be very specific on exactly what they want, especially brides. Some brides are very specific on what they want, which is good. And so it's good to ask, is there any extra thing? Some people will want just a basic design, but they'll tell you, we want one cake that looks like an African pot, or that looks like a kiondo, or looks like a jiko, something like this. So you need to kind of ask people, are you thinking of anything extra? And if you need to, you can tell them, listen, I can do an extra thing. However, this extra thing is gonna cost you, right? Or they tell you, oh, we want a topper on top that says Mr. and Mrs. and be like, yeah, I cannot add on to that at no cost. that kind of thing, right? That's the 12th question you want to ask. 13th question you want to ask is about presentation, right? Now, you don't have to give them specific, but you do want to talk about how you're going to present this cake. And one of the things, I currently don't specifically take wedding cake orders. I do some specifically. I'm very particular on what I pick. However, one of the things I used to tell people is, I need this from you. For example, if I know I'm going to go present in your wedding, I'm going to tell you, you need to already have, especially if you're in Kenya, you need to make sure you have the tent for the wedding cake, and you need to make sure you have the decoration already done. This is because I know a baker who had like a surprise. She arrived there and they just had the table, and they told her that they expected her to bring the tent and the decoration. I thought it was a little petty, but it happens. And so I think that the best thing to do is make sure you have had this discussion with your bride or the couple or whoever's ordering the wedding cake. Talk about presentation and just confirm with them. Listen, with your tent person, make sure there's going to be a tent for the wedding cake and it's going to be decorated, correct? And if not, tell them, make sure that they do that. Tell them this is something they need to provide for you. If they absolutely refuse to provide for you, tell them it's going to be an extra cost for you to provide a table, a tent, and decoration. I just say this because it's not good to assume things. It's better to just confirm things, right? So the 13th thing you want to talk about is presentation, cake stand, table, all that stuff. The 14th question you want to ask, because we're going for 20 questions, cake tasting request. Now, this doesn't always have to be the first time, but I like mentioning it to the person. So sometimes people talk about cake tasting and they want to, maybe this is the first time they've encountered you, they've never really ordered cake from you. And they're wondering, how does your cake taste? The first thing I tell people, first and foremost, please, bakers, stop doing free cake tasting. I have a separate video, right? If you're on YouTube, there's a separate video that I have on wedding cake tasting. And there are two videos. So once you're done watching this live, you can go watch them on our YouTube Baking with Amari. What I talk about wedding cake tasting, number one, I give you an example of how to come up with the slices and package them. So if you're not sure how to do that, I have a video on that. Second thing I talk about is why you need to charge for your wedding cake tasting. In this day and age, guys, we cannot afford to give away free cakes, especially if you're a home baker or you have a small bakery shop. It's a very expensive thing, right? So it's important to at least charge it so that you're able to get that money back. I've talked about how to deal with it if the person ends up signing up with you and you can tell them, I'm going to remove that cost for wedding cake tasting. So what you're going to do in this particular question is ask them, either are they interested in a wedding cake tasting, and you can tell them, I have package A and B if you want to do a wedding cake tasting. Or I actually had somebody who actually paid for the wedding cake first and then wanted to do a wedding cake tasting after, which was fine because I actually have the cost of a wedding cake tasting included in the original wedding cake quotation. They just don't know that. So I was able to give them 2 weeks before wedding cake tasting so they can pick the flavor that they wanted. So just a point, discuss wedding cake tasting if it's something that they're interested in. Tell them your terms. Do you charge for it? Is it free if you choose to do it for free? All that type of stuff. But please don't do it for free, guys, right? What if this person doesn't book with you, right? If they don't book with you, you won't get your money back, right? And everybody will keep getting free cake from you, which is not a good thing. So that's the 14th question you want to ask. 15th question you want to ask, especially if this is your first wedding cake order, is backup plan for the events. Now, the reason I say this is because some people, I particularly remember a baker that I used to work who was actually one of my mentorship students. She had somebody who wanted Swiss meringue buttercream. If any of you have worked with Swiss meringue buttercream, you know it is very, very particular, very perishable. You can't leave it outside. And it was an outdoor wedding, by the way. I thought she was so brave. I'd never agree to this. I would only agree to this if it was indoors. It was an outdoor wedding. Now, I think part of the reason why she agreed is that it was in a hotel and they were able to give her the kitchen, right? Which means she could use a fridge and she could fix up stuff before presenting the cake 1 hour before it was time to cut the cake. So what I would say is, if you have a particularly sensitive wedding cake order, SNBC, maybe whipped cream, or if, just in case somebody decides to ask for fresh whipped cream and you agree, right? Because everybody's different. I wouldn't, but hey, if there is something special or specific about a cake, it's important to ask, listen, I will come in, I may not set up outside or something like that. Do you have somewhere where I can set the cake meanwhile as we wait for the right timing, right? If there is a kitchen nearby, if there's such a thing. My first wedding cake that I did was actually my cousin's, and I remember that we ended up doing the finishing of the wedding cake in a lady's house who was a family friend who was just a few very close to the wedding venue. So it was easy to move the cake from where it was to the venue, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Like do I have to show up with a cake? Can I set this cake up somewhere that is, maybe hygienic that you can use it? So that's the 15th question I would suggest asking. Is there somewhere backup where I can set up the cake meanwhile and work on it before setting it up? 16th question to ask your bride or your couple is delivery fees or delivery, right? Again, back to logistics. If this is an out of county, if this is a destination, and I've even seen people do out of country, if this is that type of wedding cake, you need to at least manage expectations and tell them, listen, this is gonna cost you, and this is gonna cost you roughly this much, right? So you just kind of want to talk about them with them. If I have to bring this cake to this distance, I will have to charge you for delivery. It is gonna cost me more to do this. So just something to consider. The I think this is the 17th question or the 18th question to ask you. I've lost track of my numbers, guys. Sorry. Question to ask your bride is the timeline for final decisions. So this is really not more like a question, more like a sharing of information. So one of the things that I know, especially when you're starting, bakers don't do this, but please do this. It's gonna help you attract the right customers. Please start talking about timelines and final, like I will not take this order by this time, and deadlines. So one of the things I tell people is that I will not take an order less than 2 weeks. It has to be at least 30 days, right? Because I'm able to plan myself and buy the stuff that I need and all that stuff. Second thing is that I have a deadline for when you place the deposit, and I have a percent for the deposit. For example, I would tell you you have to pay 70% of the deposit at least 30 days before, or at least 20 days before. Why? That gives me enough time to buy the materials. If I'm making any sugar or flours or anything before, or buy anything before, I can buy confidently knowing that you have given me the deposit and you have signed a contract, because that's the other thing people never do. You need to make sure you have a contract, because this is a big wedding order. It's a custom order, and so you need to make sure you at least have a contract on how they should behave and how you should behave. And this contract protects both of you. In case your client starts wondering, like, I don't know, tell them, listen, this just ties me to having that you can sue me if I don't do the right thing, right? But it also, for you, the baker, puts you in a good position not to be taken advantage of, because we've heard of horror stories of what happens to people if they don't have contracts and something bad happens and the person still wants their money back, right? So just a point. So ask them, or at least tell them, the timeline for decision making. One of the things I even tell people is that after 14 days to the wedding, you can change the design. You'll have somebody who you've agreed, you've done 100 lilies, sugar lilies, then 5 days to the event, they're like, oh, I changed my mind, I want red roses, right? That's not going to work, guys. So have timeline and deadlines for specific decisions. And the top ones are usually deposit and change of design, right? Have those discussions with your couple. I'm pretty sure this is the 19th question that you want to talk about is cake handling. Now I know this is sort of like repetition, but just kind of like, how am I gonna set up this cake, or handle this cake on site, right? And especially with somebody who's picking up that cake again, how are you going to handle this cake? How are you going to cut this cake and all that stuff? And for you, especially for bakers, the reason I put this in is please have a kit when you're going to the wedding, right? Make sure you have gloves, you have serviettes, you have wet wipes, you have these specific things that are going to keep it hygienic for you. You have a hairnet, right? You're not just doing this in a very sort of like food unsafe kind of way. If you do need to talk about it, the other reason I put this in, especially for African or Kenyan weddings, you know what I'm talking about. This is a story that a former alumni of mine told me, where every time they go to a certain wedding, because she's really based with the church, there's these cake matrons that talk, right? They talk and they tell people about this wedding cake when the baker's supposed to be cutting. And she kept having this issue where the cake matron kept insisting that she wants her own cake to go home with. Another place, she had a cake matron who kept insisting on cutting cake, and she would touch it with her hands and she would serve people, and it was very unhygienic. And so I told her, make a stand. Tell these people that I have my assistant, me and my assistant have a food handler certificate, and we are the only ones who are supposed to touch this cake. So if you need to have these conversations, especially if you're in the African market and somebody's gonna have a cake matron, have these conversations with your client beforehand so it doesn't become an issue for you. And I know what you know what I'm talking about. The final question, or the final things you want to talk about, the final one is really a question, and then the final one is really a comment. So first and foremost, I do this with my students when you come to class. If you have ever come to my class, you know you've signed something, or anybody who's doing a master class. I ask for consent on photography and promotion. So I always tell people, hey, we post pictures. Can we post your picture, right? And for the wedding cake, what I tell people is that if the wedding cake photo is taken at our bakery, we are gonna post this photo, even if, especially if it doesn't have your name. But if you do give us a wedding cake photo after, we will ask for your consent to post this on our social media, right? So it's important to get consent, because we all know these days, there's lawsuits and other things that happen if you don't get consent. So make sure you get consent on the photography and promotion, that you can use it for promotion. If these people don't want their face taken, you can just ask, can I just take the photo of the wedding cake without any names or something like that, right? So just get consent on taking photos and promotion of the product or their product. The final thing I want to talk about, or final thing you want to ensure you talk about, is contract and payment terms. I know I mentioned before, but this specifically is very important. Reiterate to the couple your deadlines and your terms when it comes to how to pay you, how much percent to pay you, when is the balance due. Because here's the thing, the last wedding cake I did, the balance was due 5 days before the wedding cake order. And I have absolutely no qualms with that term, because the day of the wedding, I can't chase that bride for the balance. They're busy, they are, thinking about other things. So sometimes it's better to have another type of condition or term that agrees, listen, what do you need to be able to be confident in paying me 5 days before? So for that person who was paying me 5 days before, my term was that I can give you a mock, a mock example of one of your tiered cakes. And I do that with a dummy. With that mock setup, actually the lady ended up showing up, saw the mock setup of the one wedding cake with the design around and the flowers on top, and she was satisfied and she gave me the balance. So that's how I do it. You can choose to do it in different ways, but guys, get that balance before the wedding cake. The number of horror stories I've heard of, I was chasing them 5 months later because they had so much of my money, especially for those people who do 50%. You're chasing somebody after they have eaten the wedding cake, gone on their honeymoon, and they're good to go, for the other 50% of a cake you've already done. That is a very big loss making action or activity. So if you can, start looking for those types of clients who are willing to pay you that balance, either the day of if they insist, but I would say at least a few days before, because it's going to be safe, not be stressed. And for me, I am willing to do one mock tier for you to be confident in my skill 5 days before. That was sort of the L I had to take, sort of like the thing I give up. But again, I've included it in my costing, and I am very okay with doing that because I know you're going to pay me on time and I won't have to chase you after the wedding, which is great. So that's the thing. A final thing I do want to mention is that you can ask for emergency contact. So this is the case where you're only dealing with the bride or the bride and the groom. They're going to be busy on that day and something might go wrong. Like, for example, maybe the vehicle you're in, something happens, you're going to be late or something. Ask them for an emergency contact, or what do they call them? Maybe event planner or whoever's running the thing. Ask for contact with another person that you can reach on the day of the wedding day, because something could go wrong. Maybe you can get lost. If you're driving, you can get lost on your way there or something like that. And so have somebody else that you can reach out to about this wedding cake, or to let them know like I'm on my way or whatever, just so that you can have somebody to call in case you're worried about something, you want to ask about something, or you have a specific problem about the venue. Just somebody you can talk to that has something to do with the planning of the event. So make sure you have an emergency contact that you can talk to, especially on the day of the wedding cake, so you don't have issues. So I hope this has really helped you guys out. Thank you, Immaculate, for the questions. If anybody else has a question, please let me know. I do want to finish this up by telling you guys that out of all this information I've shared of the questions you can ask somebody, especially this is geared towards anybody who's doing a wedding cake for the first time. Like I said, I was inspired to do this because of somebody who reached out and I literally could not talk to them at that time about the questions to ask people. And then I realized I don't have a free resource for this. And so I decided to do this live. So if you want a sort of a worksheet or a consultation that you can print, and as you're talking to those people, you can take, you can just DM me on WhatsApp and I can just send you the PDF thing that you can print and you can just be using it for yourself. It has no logo or anything. It's just a document that's plain with the questions and you can, with blank spaces where you can fill in. So if you're on TikTok, I will leave that. If you check our profile, that's actually where our contact is, and you can DM on WhatsApp. If you're on YouTube, just check the description. You'll see the link for WhatsApp and you can just reach out to us for that. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful to you guys. I do not see any questions, so if you have a question on this, you can just, I'm going to stay on just a little bit to see if anybody has a question on this on here. YouTube, all the best. Make sure you subscribe and I'll see you guys in the next one. Check the link to see the WhatsApp DM to DM.